Andrew Reed, a successful businessman, born and raised in Southern California. At 55, Andrew had already spent 2 decades as the owner of a major construction company specializing in luxury residential complexes and business centers. The company brought him millions, and his name was well known among the most influential circles in Los Angeles. He was a widower. His first wife, the mother of Chris, tragically died in a car accident in 2000 when Chris was just 9 years old. A few years after this tragedy, Andrew met Emma, who entered his life like a breath of fresh air. Their wedding took place in December 2006, becoming a significant social event. After the marriage, Andrew purchased a massive home in a quiet Los Angeles suburb, a luxurious mansion with a pool, spacious garden, and several acres of land. Emma Reed, Emma, a former model, was born and raised in a small town in Northern California. She always sought a life of beauty and luxury, which she achieved when, at the age of 28, she met Andrew at a charity dinner in Los Angeles. Emma adapted well to the role of the wife of a powerful man. She engaged in charity work, attended social events. But despite the outward idyll, behind her bright exterior were hidden inner struggles. Her marriage to Andrew, built on financial stability and status, over time began to feel like a prison to her. However, she managed to maintain the image of a perfect wife for those around her, keeping her true feelings locked away behind the closed doors of their mansion. Chris Reed, Andrew's son from his first marriage. Born in 1991 in Beverly Hills, Chris grew up surrounded by luxury and his father's high expectations. He graduated from the prestigious UCLA in 2016 with a degree in business and soon began working at his father's construction company. Chris was young, attractive, and ambitious. Many saw him as the heir to the family business. From a young age, he was accustomed to attention and was popular in the social circles of Los Angeles. His relationship with his stepmother Emma began as purely formal, but after a few years, it started to take on more intimate overtones. Emma and Chris. What started as friendly interaction between stepmother and stepson gradually grew into something more. The first signs appeared in late 2016, small gestures, lingering glances. Chris, who was used to women's attention, began to notice that Emma saw him as more than just her husband's son. Soon their conversations became less mundane and more personal. They started spending time together under the guise of business meetings, walks, or helping Chris with work. During this time, Andrew was busy expanding his business and was rarely home, giving Emma and Chris more freedom for their secret meetings. Every time Andrew went on a business trip, the tension between them intensified. Emma increasingly found herself drawn to her hidden feelings for Chris, while Chris enjoyed the thrill of the situation without fully grasping its seriousness. March 15, 2017, became a turning point for the Reed family. On the evening of Saturday, March 14th, 26-year-old Chris stayed at his father's house for the weekend. After a long work week, he planned to meet friends in downtown Los Angeles. His last recorded appearance was on the mansion's security cameras around 7:45 p.m. He was dressed in his usual jeans and jacket and quickly headed to his car. No one paid attention to the fact that he left a little earlier than expected. Emma watched him go, silently observing from the second-floor window. No one saw Chris again that night. When Chris didn't return home that night, it didn't initially raise concern. Andrew assumed his son might have stayed with friends or at one of the nightclubs Chris often frequented, but by the morning of March 15th, everything had changed. Andrew began calling his son around 9 a.m., but his calls went unanswered. Chris wasn't responding to messages either, which was unusual for him, especially when he was in the city. Concern grew, and after a few hours, Andrew could no longer sit idly by. He contacted Chris's friends, but none of them had seen him that night. Some claimed he planned to join them, but he never showed up. After several hours of fruitless searching, Andrew went to the police station. At 1:30 p.m. on March 15th, a missing person report was filed for Chris Reed. The police quickly sprang into action. Chris was well known in his circles and had influence thanks to his father's status in business. The disappearance of such a young man, especially under these circumstances, raised serious concerns. Chris's car, a black BMW, couldn't be located. Security cameras along the route to his supposed meeting spot did not capture his car or his presence. This heightened fears that something had happened before he left the suburbs. 3 days after his disappearance, on March 17, 2017, a full-scale search operation was launched. Volunteers, police officers, search dogs, and local residents joined forces, hoping to find Chris. The dense forest surrounding the Reed mansion posed a challenge, but search teams with dogs were dispatched there. Chris's disappearance gradually became a top news story, and attention toward the Reed family only intensified. The Reed mansion, once known as a symbol of success, had now become the center of an investigation. Police were constantly stationed at the gates, guarding the house and monitoring the progress of the case. Chris's associates, colleagues, friends, and even employees of the family company were called in for questioning. The police carefully examined Chris's movements, analyzed phone records and bank transactions, hoping to find any clues that could shed light on his disappearance. At first, Emma Reed seemed deeply distressed by her stepson's disappearance. She attended the family's initial meetings, where they discussed possible locations he might be, and even appeared on camera in news reports, answering questions about Chris. Her eyes were full of tears, and at first glance she appeared to be a woman who had lost a beloved family member. However, as the investigation progressed, the police and those around her began to notice more and more strange behavior. In the days following Chris's disappearance, Emma began appearing less frequently alongside Andrew and distancing herself from conversations about the investigation. She stopped giving comments to the media, avoided meeting with the police, and found various excuses not to participate in organized searches. Her behavior seemed odd, even though there was no evidence against her. She spent more time alone in her room or out in the garden, avoiding interaction with neighbors and volunteers. Despite her outward calm, Emma was growing increasingly anxious inside. She closely followed the unfolding events, but dodged her husband's questions about where she had been the night Chris disappeared. Andrew, consumed by the search for his son, couldn't help but notice that his wife was avoiding the topic. Locals who knew the Reeds only superficially began spreading rumors that something was wrong within the family, but no one yet suspected the dark secrets that might be lurking behind the closed doors of their home. The police noticed her strange behavior, but didn't give it much weight in the early stages. They were focused on finding Chris, and Emma remained in the background. However, her indifference to the situation gradually drew more attention from those working on the case. Chris Reed's disappearance was the beginning of a chain of events that shook the entire family, causing their seemingly perfect life to start unraveling before their eyes. On March 17, 2017, 2 days after the massive search began, a tragic discovery changed everything. Early in the morning, as police and volunteers continued combing through the dense forest surrounding the Reed mansion, a group of K-9 officers found the body of a young man in the underbrush, several kilometers from the main house. It was Chris Reed. His body was found unnaturally twisted on the dry grass, with his clothes torn and partially burned. The sight of his remains shocked everyone present. Forensic experts quickly determined that Chris had died as a result of brutal violence. His body showed signs of burns on his hands and chest, indicating an attempt to set it on fire, likely made by the perpetrator to cover their tracks. However, the fire hadn't fully destroyed the body. Furthermore, deep cuts and abrasions were found on his body, suggesting that he had fought desperately for his life before succumbing to his injuries. Around the scene of the murder, evidence of a struggle was found. Blood on branches and bushes, broken twigs, and Chris's scattered belongings. The key discovery was small pieces of skin found under his fingernails. These clues indicated that Chris had fought fiercely with his attacker, leaving behind a potential trail of the perpetrator's DNA, which could help investigators identify the killer. Forensic experts immediately sent the samples for DNA testing in an effort to establish the assailant's identity. In addition to the body, investigators found another crucial piece of evidence. Not far from where Chris lay, they discovered his cell phone. The phone was damaged, its screen shattered, but it still worked. Digital forensic experts immediately began recovering the data, and soon they uncovered something that became a new turning point in the investigation. On Chris's phone, recent text messages sent the night before his disappearance were found. These messages revealed a dark, intense side of his life that no one had suspected. The text exchanges between Chris and Emma Reed, Chris's stepmother, hinted at ambiguous and intimate moments that suggested their relationship was more than just familial. Furthermore, the last messages pointed to a serious conflict. Chris was demanding a meeting with Emma to discuss their relationship and the problems that had begun to torment them. He wrote that this can't go on any longer and that they needed to settle everything. These phrases made investigators wonder, what had really happened the night Chris disappeared? The data recovery also revealed that Emma had sent several messages to Chris shortly before his presumed time of death. These messages seemed filled with fear and hesitation, as if she were trying to warn him about something or dissuade him from taking further steps. After Chris's body was found, the police intensified their interviews with witnesses, including neighbors and other local residents. Some reported hearing strange sounds and screams coming from the Reed house during the night of March 14th to 15th. One nearby neighbor recalled hearing loud voices and shouting coming from the mansion around midnight. He claimed that, although the sounds didn't last long, they were sharp and aggressive enough to catch his attention. This witness stated that he didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it could have been a family argument. But now, after Chris's body was discovered, he realized those screams might have coincided with the time of his murder. These statements drew the attention of investigators, who began to consider Emma and Andrew as potential suspects in the tragedy. The police also started reviewing security camera footage from the area, trying to trace Chris's and other family members' movements on the day he disappeared. Special attention was given to the route Chris took when he left the house and headed toward the woods. Despite the lack of direct evidence implicating Emma in the murder, suspicions around her began to grow, especially after the discovery of the conflict in their messages. The Reed mansion became a focal point for constant police scrutiny. Multiple searches were conducted inside the house. Investigators began searching for any clues that could confirm their suspicions that Chris and Emma had been involved in more than just family relations. On March 22, 2017, several days after Chris's body was found, investigators started to unravel the chain of events that led to the tragedy. Through a thorough analysis of messages and digital evidence on Chris's phone, the police were able to confirm that Chris and Emma had been involved in a secret romantic relationship. This revelation shocked not only the public, but also the Reed family itself. When the police summoned Emma for questioning, the atmosphere in the room was tense. Her attempts to remain composed quickly crumbled under the weight of the evidence and the barrage of questions. Eventually, Emma, overwhelmed by the pressure, confessed to her affair with Chris. She revealed that their relationship had started about 6 months earlier, when Chris had been staying more frequently at his father's house. Their bond developed slowly, beginning with small touches and glances, which soon escalated into passionate encounters. Emma could no longer hide her inner turmoil. During one of the interrogations, she broke down in tears, describing how she had been drawn to Chris's youth and energy. These secret meetings had provided her with an escape, something that filled her dull and predictable life with emotions. However, as the days went by, her relationship with Chris became increasingly risky, and the fear of being exposed haunted her every step. She knew that sooner or later their secret would come to light, and it would destroy her life. According to Emma's testimony, on the night of the murder, Chris was determined to end the ambiguous relationship and face the consequences. He came to his father's house with a clear intention to put an end to the lies and manipulation. Chris wanted Emma to make a choice. Either she would break things off with Andrew and build a future with him, or he would confront Andrew himself and reveal everything. This ultimatum was unbearable for Emma. She found herself trapped between destroying her marriage to Andrew and the potential scandal. That night, she said, Emma was in a state of extreme stress. She and Chris met in the woods near the house to discuss everything away from prying eyes and ears. Their conversation quickly escalated into an argument. Chris, filled with rage, demanded that Emma make a decision immediately. In her testimony, she claimed that Chris had threatened to go into the house and tell Andrew everything he knew. At that moment, Emma realized she was losing control of the situation. Overcome with emotion, she grabbed the nearest branch and struck Chris in a panic. A struggle ensued. Chris tried to defend himself, which explained the injuries on his body and the bits of skin under his fingernails. According to Emma, she never intended to kill him, but in that moment, everything spiraled out of control. However, to the police, This explanation sounded like a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility for a premeditated crime. On March 23, 2017, the DNA test results provided investigators with crucial evidence. The skin samples found under Chris's nails unequivocally matched Emma. This pushed the case into a new phase. Police had gathered enough evidence for formal charges. Emma was arrested in her own home that same day. As she was led out in handcuffs, Andrew stood in the doorway, watching in disbelief. To him, it felt like a nightmare, one in which his wife and son had become entangled in a terrible tragedy. The shocking truth that his wife and son had been involved in a romantic relationship, leading to murder, shattered him internally. The gathered evidence, DNA traces, text messages, and witness testimony, painted a complete picture for the investigators. The romantic relationship between Emma and Chris had turned into a catastrophe, driven by her fear of exposure, which ultimately led her to commit murder. Emma was placed in custody and charged with first-degree murder. Despite her admission of the affair with Chris, she continued to insist that the killing had been an unintended act of self-defense. However, considering the evidence collected, the police were convinced that her motive was to protect her marriage to Andrew and avoid the disgrace that could destroy their lives. While Emma remained in custody, investigators continued to gather additional evidence to fully close the case and prove that her actions had been premeditated. On October 2, 2018, Emma Reed's long-awaited trial began. The charge of second-degree murder became the subject of heated debate, both in the courtroom and in the media. The story of the secret affair between a stepmother and stepson that ended in a brutal killing shocked the public and became one of the most discussed topics of the year. During the trial's opening, prosecutors presented their version of events. They argued that Emma had coldly planned the murder out of fear that Chris would expose their affair to Andrew. In their view, Emma saw Chris as a threat to her well-being, reputation, and status in the family, which she had carefully built. Prosecutors used the text messages found on Chris's phone, where he threatened to reveal their relationship to his father, as evidence. They emphasized that Chris's death was not an accident, but the result of a calculated act of desperation. The defense, on the other hand, sought to portray Emma as a woman under severe emotional and mental distress. They claimed her actions were unintentional. She had not planned to kill Chris, but acted impulsively in a state of emotional turmoil, faced with threats and instability. The defense argued that the relationship with Chris had escalated into conflict, which ultimately led to tragedy. But it was not a premeditated murder. It was a failed attempt to defend herself from her stepson's threats. One of the most emotional moments of the trial came when Andrew Reed took the stand. Gaunt and hollow-eyed, he slowly approached the microphone, his face filled with pain. Andrew had witnessed the destruction of his family, the family he once thought was perfect. Struggling to hold back tears, he described how he felt betrayed and shocked upon learning of the relationship between his wife and son. He spoke of how much he adored Chris and had hoped they could run the family business together. Andrew recalled every moment with Chris, planning their future and sharing their ambitious dreams. "I never thought my happiness could be so cruelly shattered," Andrew said. His voice trembled as he described trying to reconcile the thought that the woman he had trusted and the son who was his pride had been involved in this destructive whirlwind of passion and deceit. He admitted that he couldn't believe it even after the evidence of their affair came to light. But the hardest blow for him was realizing that Emma could have gone so far as to commit murder to keep her secret. When the prosecutor asked how he felt after everything that had happened, Andrew simply replied, "I've lost them both. My son is gone, and my wife is dead to me." After lengthy hearings where both the defense and the prosecution presented their arguments, the judge finally delivered the verdict. On November 12, 2018, after several days of deliberation, the jury found Emma Reed guilty of second-degree murder. Considering her emotional state and the complex circumstances of the case, the judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Emma sat at the defendant's table with her head bowed. Her face showed no emotion, though the courtroom was heavy with the realization that her life, like the Reed family's, had been irrevocably destroyed. Andrew was not present for the sentencing. He could not bear to witness the final blow. Later, his lawyer told the press that Andrew was broken and had no intention of ever restoring any connection with Emma. For the Reed family, the verdict marked not an end, but the beginning of a long journey toward healing. Emma was sent to prison, where she would spend her years, far from the luxurious mansion and the life she had desperately tried to preserve. Andrew was left alone, his heart shattered, his memories now steeped in pain and loss. After the trial and Emma Reed's sentencing, Andrew remained alone in his sprawling home on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The mansion, once full of life, now felt empty and cold. Every corner, every room reminded him of the family harmony that would never return. Andrew, once a successful businessman with an impeccable reputation, began to feel the ground slipping from beneath him. The constant thoughts of Chris and Emma tormented him day and night. He could no longer find solace in his work. The family business, once thriving, began to crumble in the wake of the scandal. Clients and partners began distancing themselves, wary of being associated with the Reed name. Over time, Andrew began to avoid his colleagues and friends. He refused meetings, isolating himself in his office, lost in endless contemplation of how his life had unraveled so quickly and catastrophically. Every morning, he awoke in an empty bed, and the silence of the house became unbearable. The family portraits on the walls now served as painful reminders of losses that could never be replaced. He found himself spending hours staring at photos of Chris, smiling, full of life, brimming with plans for the future. Time didn't ease his pain, it only deepened it. The outdoor area near the house, where he and Chris used to spend time playing basketball and discussing their plans, was now a place he could no longer bear to visit. What was once filled with happy memories had become a symbol of lost hopes and a shattered life. In an attempt to escape these feelings, Andrew began drinking, which only worsened his depression. The once powerful businessman was slowly but surely losing his sense of purpose. The mansion had become his prison, a place where the walls reminded him that he had lost not only his son, but also his faith in the people he once loved. Though Emma was now behind bars, she still occupied his thoughts. He couldn't comprehend how she, the woman he trusted, could have committed such a terrible betrayal. This story stands as a stark example of how destructive passions can tear apart even the strongest of families. Andrew Reed's story shows that unchecked hidden desires and betrayal inevitably lead to tragedy. Blinded by love and trust, he couldn't see the dark sides of those closest to him. After everything that happened, Andrew understood that passion and betrayal had destroyed everything he had spent years building. Chris's death, Emma's imprisonment, and his own loneliness became the embodiment of how secret passions and reckless actions can ruin lives, leaving behind only pain and emptiness. Time could not bring back the family